Well, thank you very much. It's nice to be here once again after 2 years, and I always have to issue the warning: don't drop one of these on your foot. You can do serious damage to your toes or something like that. But the having worked on as co-author of the Almanac of American Politics, this is the 20th volume on which I've worked, coming out every 2 years. I guess it's got more than 1,000,000 words. I'm sort of reminded of the comment that the Duke of Egmont in 18th century England was supposed to have made to Edward Gibbon when Gibbon presented him with recently published Volume 3 of The Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire. And the Duke said, "Well, nothing but scribble, 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 eh, Mr. Gibbon?" So we have been scribbling, and it's been fun for many years to have the privilege of trying to describe for Americans every member of Congress, senators, congressmen, governors of the states, presidents of the United States, and to describe their states and districts. And one of the things that I think I have the most fun with is some of the descriptions of the states, the congressional districts. This book gives me a chance to revisit all 50 states. I usually go through a sort of exercise in my mind. What would it be like to live there? Where would I want to live if I lived in Nebraska, which I could find quite a pleasant place to live, and so forth, and go through that, and to go through their history. So I've written 1,000 state profiles over the last 38 years, and congressional district profiles. I'm not even going to chart the number. Some of the things stay the same in them. I like to talk about, I think beginnings matter, and Daniel Boone coming through the Cumberland Gap, that still has some relevance to Kentucky, and in fact several 100,000 people coming through this wilderness road to settle Kentucky in the early years. That still has some bearing on Kentucky politics, and you can be aware of that if you're ever at the swearing in of a governor of Kentucky. And each governor, either he or, it's the case of Martha Lane Collins, she must swear as part of the oath of office that he or she has never participated in a duel or has been a second in a duel. This is still in there in the oath of office of the governor of Kentucky, and that's it tells us something about the past, about the roots of politics. And the roots of the different cultures that we have in this country. They're all American cultures, but there are all these interesting variations, and they have a certain relevance. I mean, I'm working on a subsequent non-almanac book on American migrations, internal as well as immigrant. And you can see the movement of Americans 200 years ago in the election figures from the 2008 election. If you look at the maps of the counties in the South, the rural South that Barack Obama carried in this last election, both in the primaries and in the general election, it's a map of the westward migration of big plantation owners, slave owners, into areas like the Black Belt of Alabama and ultimately the Delta of Mississippi, the lower Louisiana, and so forth. That movement of people, it was a forced movement, obviously, of the majority of those people, is reflected in large black populations. They voted heavily for Barack Obama. If you look at the counties, a map of the counties where Obama ran worse, or where John McCain ran better than George W. Bush, where he got a higher percentage. Obviously, it's a minority of counties. But that's the great southwestern migration of the Scots-Irish from southwestern Pennsylvania down West Virginia, Kentucky, Tennessee, then going southwest across northern Alabama, Mississippi, into Arkansas, Oklahoma, and parts of rural Texas. Some people have attributed the Scots-Irish areas voting heavily against Obama, both in the primaries for Hillary Clinton and then the general election for John McCain, as a sort of racism. I think there's another factor really that's involved, and that is the Scots-Irish have always been kind of our most fighting individuals. I mean, if you read the history of Andrew Jackson, who shot and killed 2 men in duels, and was a general and a great military leader in many ways. the sort of spirit that he had is echoed in the Scots-Irish. Their sort of attitude is, you leave me alone, I'll leave you alone. If you threaten my family or my country, I'll kill you. And Obama, on the other hand, seems to me to present an image that is more professorial. He talks about negotiating with people who have been our enemies. He's kind of the opposite of this. And so we can say that these Scots-Irish mountain-type people don't like black people. If we go to southwest Virginia, the fighting 9th Congressional District, and take a look at how those areas voted in the election between Doug Wilder and Marshall Coleman for governor in 1989, we find that actually Doug Wilder did a whole lot better than Barack Obama. He was a person that was more adapted to that kind of terrain. He campaigned actively there. It was an important part of the state, whereas Obama had a whole country to campaign in. And so I think some of these attitudes that people bring with them that have been nurtured over the generations, the heritages that we have, are reflected in our politics. Let me just share with you, as kind of an attempt to provide an overview. And, you know, I'm an opinion columnist in the Washington Examiner, but I feel a responsibility in this almanac to try to present as fair-minded, objective, and inoffensive to all sides point of view that I can to, in effect, you know, why is each incumbent member of Congress got there by doing something positive. And I feel I have an obligation to my readers to set out what that might be, what they're working on, how effective they are, particularly if they're very effective. So I try to write it in a way that will give readers a certain amount of pleasure and very little pain, and hope that I've succeeded. But two themes that I mentioned in my introductory essay this time, and that I think have probably continuing relevance. One of those is that we are in an era of vastly increasing voter turnout. And I think it's something we tend to ignore. I mean, when I do election night broadcasts for Fox, as I did multiple times on the primaries and then then on election night, one of the data that I don't have to present to viewers is total turnout, because, you know, the figures are just coming in on election night. Sometimes you've got complete figures for a county or a jurisdiction. You can compare it to previous things, and I've done that on occasion. But we don't get the full numbers on voter turnout until about mid-December. Even the Bush-Gore contest in 2001 was settled by then. California, which is about 12% of our population, doesn't get around to tallying all those votes and reporting them till mid-December. So we don't know the total turnout, and people don't pay much attention to that. In journalism, you know, the day after the election, they turn from election analysis to who's going to be in the cabinet and what's going to happen here and what the new administration is going to do, all legitimate news stories, but people don't look at the turnout. And over the years, I think some of you are perhaps too young to remember this, but we've often heard about low voter turnout in America. What a shame it is that people are indifferent, that they don't participate, that we have levels of turnout that have been just a little bit above 50% of eligibles in elections, that we've had declining turnout roughly since the 1960s as a percentage of eligible population. Those data are somewhat exaggerated. Actually, when you look at the historical data, both for presidential and off-year elections, what you find is there was sort of a step decrease about 1970, 72, 74, the elections in which 18-year-olds got the vote. Part of the reason for that is that the newly enfranchised 18 to 20-year-old age group was less likely to vote and to participate than their elders. Continues to be true even in this past calendar year, where there was increase in young voter turnout. But that doesn't explain the whole difference. For some reason, participation went down, and to me it's particularly ironic because those were just after the years when, through the Voting Rights Act of 1965, we enfranchised lots of Southern black people who had never been able to vote before in very large parts of the South. So you had really rising turnout in places like Alabama, Mississippi, South Carolina, and so forth. as compared to the early 1960s. Nonetheless, that went down, and it sort of stayed down and kind of wobbles around, and then it goes up in this decade.